Now, when I see social media with the word wine in the title, I have a tendency to want to read more. Couple it with some clever word punnery and I'm sold. So when I began seeing posts about Anne Harrison's new concept, Wine Down, it seemed like a winner to me. So we invited her in to find out more. And before we get on to the concept itself, Anne, welcome to the programme. It's lovely to have you with us. You really do know your Malbecs from your Merlots, don't you, and your Semillons from your Sauv Blancs. When did you first become interested then in the sort of finer details of wine and wine production?
I think when I was 17, I took a year out when I finished school, and my father was actually working in the wine industry at the time, and he had a supplier in Germany, a small family producer, and I went to stay with him for a year. And I went out into the vineyards, I picked the grapes, I helped make the wine, I then labelled it, I bottled it, I labelled it, and I took part in every wine tasting that went on. And because their wines were so good, there were people coming from all over Germany every week to have a wine tasting. And by the end of my 12 months there, I could tell the difference between every single wine. I could have told you whether it was a 1975 vintage or a 1976 vintage, which vineyard it was from. And it just, I loved it.
My word. It just, all of that sounds so incredibly romantic, doesn't it? The sort of the image that you're painting there. And you were very young at the time and you were saying, you know, sort of you were tasting the wines. There is that sort of different approach, isn't there, to wine in Europe, where it's seen as, it's less a sort of, oh, let's just down a bottle or whatever, as sometimes happen over here. It's more about, very much more about the sort of flavour and the taste and the pairing and all that sort of thing.
Yes, it is. And what I learnt in particular when I was there, I mean, these people were so passionate about what they did. They wanted to make the best possible wines they could. But they have vineyards in 3 different areas in the village, and each one produced a different flavour of wine, a different style of wine, and that all came from the soil. And so being able to recognise those differences, those very subtle differences, it was all the same grape variety, it was all Riesling, but grown in different aspects, different soil types. It just made that little bit of difference, and it made me realise how those subtle differences can be so interesting, and how tasting lots of different Rieslings it wasn't just one, just because it was all Riesling didn't mean it all tasted the same. Each one was different, and it's a fascinating subject, but the more you start to learn about it, the more you realise that there's an awful lot to learn.
And is it something that you say to learn? Can you learn that taste sensitivity, or is it something to an extent that you also need to be born with?
If you have a sense of smell, then you should be able to learn how to taste wine. It just takes practice.
Oh, I like that.
I wouldn't mind practising that if it means learning more. And that was Germany, obviously, but that's only one very small area of wine production when it comes down to it, isn't it? Because the wine, it seems to be produced everywhere now. It seems to be an ever sort of expanding sort of production all over the world from all different countries. So you must have then really had to sort of knuckle down to learn everything there possibly is to know.
Yes, and it's ongoing as well. There are always new grape varieties that are being sort of discovered or reinvented almost, and that's part of the fascination of it, because at the moment we've just introduced some wines from Macedonia and Croatia and Greece, and they make some great wines. And it's lovely when they use their indigenous grape varieties, because everybody knows Chardonnay, everybody knows Sauvignon Blanc. But when you've got the indigenous grape varieties from Assyrtiko, which is this new up-and-coming grape variety from Greece, it's been around a long time, but people are only now starting to recognise it. And also, particularly in Europe, the wines tend to work well with the food that is consumed or grown in that area. And so take, for example, in Spain, with the red wines, they work really well with the lamb, and or in the northwest of Spain, around the coast in Galicia, they eat a lot of fish. So obviously there's fishing ports all around the coast, and the white wines from Albarino and Godello work extremely well with the fish, and so that's all part of it, and that's where the pairing becomes more interesting as well.
So bearing that in mind then, from the different countries and different wines that you've experienced over the years, when it comes to local produce on the Isle of Man, what sort of regions would produce the correct sort of wines for some of our special dishes? I mean, you think of Queen's,
Queen's.
for instance.
Yeah, I mean, Queen is, you're looking really at crisp, fresh white wines to work well with those. And with all the fish, you can have wines like Muscadet, you could have, again, some of the Greek wines that I've sort of just mentioned. We're wanting to start a pairing, a sort of dining club, which will be 5-course meal with matching the wines and the foods, with the first one being Mediterranean style. And we'll be sort of taking unusual wines and matching them with foods from that region.
Funny question from a vegetarian here. Just wondering, like whenever I've heard about wine pairing or seen it on cooking programs on television or read the back of a wine bottle and said, it goes particularly well with roast chicken. I've never come across anything that tells you how to pair wine with vegetarian food. Is there any? I don't know. Can you give us any advice? Are there any particular styles of cooking or I don't know. Yeah,
the spices.
Yeah,
maybe,
spices. Yeah, that would pair well.
When you're pairing food and wine, it's more about the weight of the food and the body, really, of the wine. So if you've got a very light dish, then you want to have a light wine. But if you've got something that's spicy, so you could have a spicy vegetarian dish, you need a wine that has lots of flavour to be able to stand up to the spicy foods. If you have a very light wine, then it's just going to taste like water. And so it's much more about balance. And with vegetarian, take Italian food, where they use a lot of tomatoes. Tomatoes are very, very difficult to match with wine because they have high acidity. But you find that the Italian reds work well with tomatoes because most Italian reds have quite a bit of acidity. So it's really finding the balance rather than saying white wine with fish, red wine with meat. That's not as important. It's about getting the balance right.
Thank you. Duly noted.
It is a good question. I like that. And is it a given that the more you spend on the wine, the better it is?
A lot of the time, it's the more you spend on the wine. So long as the quality is there, then yes, it will be better, and you'll feel better the following day as well. Because £2.50 of every bottle of wine goes straight to the government in taxes. You've got duty and VAT on the duty, so that's £2.50. So if you're only spending £5 on a bottle of wine, you've also got the cost of shipping it, you've got the bottle cost, you've got the label cost and all of those things. So if you're only spending £5, then £2.50, you've not got a lot left for the wine. But if you spend £7.50 or £8, then that extra bit is all wine. So you're naturally going to get much more wine for your money. And as I say, it doesn't even matter if it's higher in alcohol. You won't get as bad a head if you drink a good quality wine.
That's good to know as well. And are there particular regions that you can pretty much always rely on that will consistently produce really good wine, or is it does it depend year on year because of different conditions and the weather and
depends year on year, but it depends more on who's made the wine, because you have your quality producers and they will make the best possible wine they can regardless of the conditions. So it's really the smaller producers, they're putting their family name on that bottle of wine, and so their reputation depends on it. A big company, you've not necessarily got the owner making the wine, but if you're getting wine from a small producer, it's often just a family and their livelihood depends on it. Like in France last year, there were an awful lot of hailstorms and late frost, which completely destroyed some people's crops, and that's their livelihood for that year, or their income for that year has gone. So they're constantly then looking at the weather and hoping that, and so far, touch wood, 2018 is looking like a better year.
And there's something to be said as well for that, talking about the weather. Previously, Britain was not seen as a good place to produce wine, but now there seems to be British wines popping up all over the place that are getting a really good reputation.
English sparkling wine in particular is good. They have the same soil in the sort of South Downs area. It's the same soil that they have in Champagne. It's a particular limestone soil, and it suits the grapes very well. And also, to make a good sparkling wine, you have to have quite high acidity in your grapes, and so it's quite handy not to have it too hot, so that when the grapes are harvested, they've still got quite high acidity. So you can make a good base wine in order to then go on and make a good sparkling.
Fantastic. She really does know her stuff, doesn't she? It's brilliant.
Yes.
And now you are, as you describe it, following your dream. So first of all, before we come to that, just tell us, because you're not from the island, how did you actually end up on the Isle of Man?
I've worked in the wine trade proper for a long time. I started off with a wholesaler in Yorkshire, and then I moved to a Spanish importer from London. And while I was with them, I started coming over here as a supplier. And in the end, I came here and to work here.
And you worked at the wine cellar initially,
I worked at the wine cellar for 15 years.
Yeah. And I should say as well, do you know, she actually bought a small vineyard at one point too. Do you still have it?
Well, it is still there. It's up in the hill, high up on the slope overlooking the village of St Aldegund on the Mosel. And it is still there. It's very high up, and it's actually quite difficult to maintain.
So is there still wine being produced there at the moment?
There's still grapes on it, but I think they're a little bit out of control at the moment. Or still vines on it, but they're a little bit out of control.
Oh, do you never want to just sort of go over and visit it and see how
I would
it's
love
doing?
to, and I would love to be able to make wine from there, but I say it's almost impossible to get to it.
Yeah.
It's a bit overgrown.
But you are here now, and we're very grateful that you are, with all of your knowledge, which is fantastic. And you say that it was a chance meeting with someone from a restaurant on the Isle of Man that has since led to you being able to put your sort of dream into action, so to speak. Tell us what happened.
Yes, I've been looking at places similar to Winedown in the UK, thinking that the island really needed something like that, or there was a gap for something like that on the island. And I was just having a chat as a wine supplier, and we were just chatting about different things, and he said, well, let's do it here. And so
Macfarlanes now has Winedown, which is very exciting. So just explain the concept itself then.
Because we both see things in exactly the same way, we both have the same idea that we want to offer really good quality produce. And Roy is a great chef. So he produces great quality food. We've gone for the small plates, so you can have 2, 3, 4 different dishes. You can share them, or you can, if you really don't want to share, then you can have them to yourself. But we then have our shelving full of wine, and you can choose. That is really your wine list. So you can go in and you can select any wine. We have a lot of the whites pre-chilled. You can select any wine, and we'll open it for you. You can drink it in, and then if you really like it, you could take a bottle home. But also we have a list of wines by the glass, and we've introduced now a sort of taster size glass, so that if you want to try a smaller glass with lots of with each different dish, you can do that as well. So you could have 2 or 3 glasses with 2 or 3 dishes.
Oh, it's such a good concept, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it also sort of covers that question that I often have when I go out for a meal, and it's one of those sort of awkward moments, isn't it? When if you've had a bottle of wine with your food, but you've only drunk half the bottle, and even though you've paid for it, you feel sort of uncomfortable asking to take it away with you. But that's okay at Winedown, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Yeah.
So you just put a stopper in it and say, bring it with you.